Hey, welcome to the channel. My name is Jason, and here I talk about all things story. And if you can't tell from my voice, I'm a little sick, getting over a cold, getting over the big one, if you know what I mean. I don't want to say it in case YouTube flags this video and puts it down, even though this video maybe it should be put down. But anyway, this is episode 70 of my ongoing series, Worth 1,000 Words, where I write a 1,000 word short story based on a piece of artwork, inspired by a piece of artwork is more accurate. And I know I'm late because I'm sick. I tried to get it out. I know it's technically next week, so I'm a little bit behind, actually a lot behind. I'm gonna have to write next week's story very soon, in a couple of days, most likely. And let me prepare you. This story is a bit of a failure. It didn't quite turn out. I was trusting in the story, trusting in the process, as I'd normally like to tell you to do on these videos, and that things will just work out in the end if you keep cranking through it. I didn't find the story, unfortunately, so it's kind of a weird mixture of elements. There's seeds that start to go one way that never really go anywhere, but I had to just put my pencil down at the end. I didn't want to do another 2-hour writing session, so it is what it is. And what maybe the soundtrack I chose, the music I chose, was a bit of a prophetic name. I chose the soundtrack for the film Blue Ruin by Brooke and Will Blair. Fantastic movie, appropriate title for what this story became. But anyway, at least the music is great, so you have that. All right, well, let's just get on with it. Let's move on and check out this week's artwork. This week's artwork is titled Shadow of the Sun. It is by Shuo Shi, a freelance concept artist from Beijing, China. This one is a very striking image. We have a woman who appears to not be wearing any pants, wearing a jacket, down on all fours, and there is a man in the foreground with a shotgun. And something stranger, though. In front of her is a snowman with a sad face, wearing a, looks like a bucket for a hat. And next to the snowman is this weird robotic head thing, I think. It's kind of hard to tell. But anyway, very photorealistic piece. I'm loving it. And it has some noir implications. I'm going to try to steer clear of those as much as I can. I feel like I'm doing that too much lately. Maybe having a little bit too much fun with that. But anyway, Shuo, thank you so much for this artwork. Love it. Not sure where it's going to lead me, but hopefully somewhere interesting. We shall see. All right, let's see what I came up with. She paid no mind to the cold, and it paid no mind to her. She stepped through the powder on legs that had made his own weak once. He wished the wind would pick up, because her footsteps were deafening, the sound working under his skin, through all the layers he wore to protect himself. Arms at your sides, he said. His voice sounded out of place. However, the command worked. Her gait conformed to the rigidity he'd expected, grateful for the illusion of inhumanity. Who was he kidding? It was no illusion. The thought reminded him to check his shotgun again. He worked his hand over the stock and grip to make sure it was there, to make sure he was there. He smelled the oil, more so when he went to wipe his nose. A strand of her hair broke free from its tie and flowed on a current like ink and water, yet anchored to that head, full of so much darkness that it made even more sense in metaphor. He couldn't look away, couldn't focus. He raised the shotgun so he could focus on something. That helped some. His thoughts helped more. He shouldn't speak of those. 2 rusted tractors came into view, which divided his. These echoes of civilization warned him that he should move on, that this was far too risky, if he hadn't been spotted already. Every dark stone in the snow, every tree branch judder, every subtle shift in value to the curtain of gloom were eyes out to get him. And what a sight it would be. A man armed with a shotgun, dressed in colors that spoke of no good, ushering a beautiful woman who was naked from the waist down to a place that could only be her killing ground. He kicked something. His toes throbbed behind his steel toes. A stone. Or was it? Wait, he said to her, seeing as she was still walking. She held. He gave it a moment before kneeling down to inspect the stone further. He rested the shotgun across his knee, holding the stock against his hip with his finger on the trigger. Probably not the best idea, but she didn't seem to notice. This was no stone. Some kind of machine part, but unlike anything he'd ever seen. Couldn't have been from one of these tractors, that was for sure. He touched it. Cold as expected, except for a vibration of some kind. He pressed his hand flat against it to make sure. Still there. His nerves were on edge, so it could have been him. When he looked up, she was gone. He spun, looked in every direction. Breath pluming in front of him, obscuring his view. He repeated the whole process again, memorizing every environmental feature to confirm it was where it should have been when he passed back over it. Jones. He jumped with a too hard grip on the shotgun and pulled the trigger. It knocked him on his ass, ears ringing, something hot running down his neck that must be his brains. He realigned himself on all fours, thankful that nothing red poured onto the snow. Don't look at me, Jones said. I'm not. He picked up the gun and stood. Where had she run? So many places to run. Maybe he should call it. Move on. She wouldn't last long out here anyway. He had seen that movie plenty of times and decided he didn't want to write the sequel. He felt that vibration again, this time in his boot soles, and when he looked down, she was there, as he had been, on all fours. Her eye, icier than when it fell around them, gazed up at him. He couldn't move. Did she know? Of course she did. Don't look at me, he said anyway. Maybe if she thought he could talk, she'd think he was in control. You always liked this, she said, scooting her jacket onto her hips to reveal more leg and a bit of ass. I said, don't look at me. She didn't listen. Keeping him locked with her gaze, she balled up snow, then piled it on the ground when it became too large to hold. Pine cones, twigs, and stones added to her project. Then she went to work on a new one. Roughly head-sized when she was done, she put it on top of the first one, then found 2 twigs in the snow to give it arms. The faceless snowman stared blankly at its creator while she watched Jones. His eyes watered. His chest tightened. When he cleared his eyes, the snowman was wearing a small, rusted bucket for a hat. Don't do it, Jones said. Don't do what? He tried with all his might to aim the shotgun at her. Maybe at himself would have been better. Show me. You already know. I don't. She didn't blink despite a snowflake landing on her eyeball. Once it melted, she said, You do. She picked up a pebble and placed it on the snowman where an eye should be, then another. Where is he? Jones said between clenched teeth. I thought you didn't want to know. She had him. Why did he think he could have taken care of things? He never could fix things. She'd always told him that. You're not her, Jones said. That's not him. She licked her lips, pressed them together, then released them. It's how he felt, she said. What he looked like before. Stop! Enough. I'll let you go. Just stop. You can never let me go, Jones. Just like we can never let him go. She brushed aside snow at her knee and found a twig. She put it on the snowman's face, where a mouth should go. It was inverted, sad, not happy as it should have been. Now do you remember? She asked. Her eyes teared up. It was a trick. She nodded to the shotgun. Do it. You know how people don't want to turn away from a car wreck, no matter how gruesome they know it's going to be? Well, here is that car wreck. You've heard the story, so you know by now that it kind of went nowhere. I was, the back of my mind, I was hoping that maybe the mystery, maybe the unanswered questions would create some kind of catharsis on its own. I kind of doubt it. You know, once I read through it again for the recording, I could see that there really wasn't much there. And it's funny, I told myself to stay away from noir. I've been doing it too much lately. And what did I do? I went very noir. At least, I don't know, in reading it a second time through, aside from the subject matter, which clearly is, when I meant noir, I was going to try to stay away from not only the subject matter, but the way I wrote it. And there's very noir lines in this story, unfortunately. But alas, here we are. So I don't think this one's going to be so much of a inspirational tale in the fact that I say often, don't give up. The story will find itself. I waited and I waited and I waited for the story to find itself. However, it never seemed to materialize. I guess the best thing I can do is kind of recap sort of what I was thinking as I went along. So in the beginning, I think what really threw me off on this. So first of all, let's step back and look at what a great image this is. We have this woman who looks like she's about to be executed by this man holding a shotgun. However, we have these strange objects in front of her. We have what I thought at first glance was a rock. And that's sort of what I went with early on in the story. And then, but if you look at it closely, it looks like a robot's head almost. I don't know. Maybe it's me. Maybe I'm crazy. Click on the link, check out the artwork. Let me know what you think. And then outside of that, we have this little snowman in front of her with a sad face and a bucket on its head. It's a very strange mix, man. I'm telling you. I love the tractor detail in the background. I didn't mention that yet, but it just really gives it a sense of setting, I think, and place. So what I wanted to do initially is I was assuming, well, I wanted to go against the grain, meaning that this woman looks like a victim. I wanted to make her not the victim. She's something about her glare too. The way she's looking up at him makes it look as if she sees him coming to a realization, or maybe it's an accusing glare. I don't know, but there's something to it. I was trying to pull something from it, as you know, didn't really happen. So when I started, as I said, I was trying to make her not a victim. Well, technically a victim, but not in a bad way, because she had done something terrible. And so I initially started thinking about maybe she killed their son. Maybe they were together. Maybe she's some kind of robot thing, because there's clearly a robot thing in the foreground or in the middle ground by the snowman. All these things were just kind of bouncing around in my head. And I said, you know what, just keep going. You'll figure it out. You'll connect the dots at some point. And I didn't. I paused plenty of times trying to go back, looking for clues, because that tends to help me out a lot too, is if I'm at the end and I still don't know where I want to be, I will at some point go back, like with Uchronium, where I went back and I found the detail with the man's client, who in fact was the mother. And I said, okay, that's his mom. He is the lost man that she is looking for. And it kind of made an interesting, I don't know, little nice story in the end, I think. Or at least, at the very least, it kind of connected everything together. Here I didn't find anything like that. I wasn't detailed enough in the early part of the story. I was just talking about them walking across the snow landscape. He was enjoying seeing the inhumanity of her. You know, he wanted to disassociate himself, what he was going to do, perhaps, or what she had done, or who knows. I didn't know, clearly. And then I started thinking like, oh, maybe he's crazy. Then I'm like, you know what? I've done the crazy thing already. I think I need to stop with the crazy thing. And I was thinking maybe the snowman's face is the expression on her son or his son or their son's face before she killed him. But then maybe the realization is that he killed him. And that's kind of what I went with at the end, is when she starts to cry, but he thinks it's it's an act. And she knows maybe that like what he did. And so she knows that he's taking her out here to kill her, because otherwise he could be turned in. I don't know. See what I'm talking about? I'm really reaching on this one, but I think that's all right. You know, some of these, I kind of, it sucks though, because I didn't want to have two bad ones back to back. I think last week's was probably better than this week's, and while there's some things that are, I don't know, could be, somewhat turned into a story, I think in this, there I'm messing around with the name. Names are, when you're writing a story every week, coming up with these names can be tough. That is one thing I wanted to do though. I didn't want to refer to him as Jones or his name by name until she said it. I was hoping that would be a trigger of some kind. I don't know. I was kind of thinking of like, maybe he feels anonymous if he's not thinking in his own name terms, if that's a thing. I don't know. I'm really going off the rails here, but yeah, you can see little pieces of things here and there. I thought maybe another idea I had was maybe that is his head. That robotic head is his in the snow, and she did something to make it fall off and kill him with her piercing gaze. You can tell like these are what's going on around in my head while I'm writing this, and it just it never went anywhere, unfortunately. And here we are. I was getting toward the end, and I had kind of a second idea where I wanted to do the child angle, and I thought like, okay, well, I need to probably go back and rewrite a lot of the beginning. And this was when I was probably a good 800 words in, right when I was trying to figure out the ending part, the little dialogue bit. And I went back to the top and I said, you know what? It's not worth it. It's already like, I don't want to do another 2 hour story, even though I was almost there. I just got to put some closure to this thing, call it good. Maybe somewhere in some universe, it has some kind of meaning. Maybe it's going to inspire a scene for me somewhere down the road in a different longer work. I don't want to say this is wasted time, because writing is never wasted time. You're always getting something out of it. See, I'm trying to make this into a positive experience. And I guess if you look at it as a learning experience, it is. As I mentioned, I'm sick. I was sick. I still am kind of sick. Feeling a lot better though. And if you're not in the best physical shape, that definitely lends itself to not the best mental shape. And you can see this is kind of what happens. But I'm glad I did it. I know this is very, very late. It is technically next week. I should have released this on a Friday. Hopefully this week's story, I'll say next week's story will be a little bit more interesting. There'll be some more good stuff to talk about. Hopefully I will enjoy it somewhat, and hopefully you will too. I feel bad more than anything. This reminds me again, and I called this story way back, Evil Book 2, way back in the beginning, episode 2 or 3 or something like that, where the artwork was so cool, but I couldn't come to grips with it. I couldn't do it justice. And it's funny because there's so many great things in this image. There's so many interesting things, and like, why couldn't I pull a story from that? I'm going to blame COVID. That's all I'm going to say. COVID, this one's your fault, and this will be forever marked in my series as the COVID story. Maybe I shouldn't have picked that cold one, one with snow and ice, and I don't know. Maybe I should have picked a happier one. I don't know. I'm just talking to kill time right now. I have no idea where I'm going with any of this. And about 20 minutes left to go in the story. You can tell I'm writing this little dialogue bit at the end. Here's another hint. She didn't blink despite a snowflake landing on her eyeball. Once it melted, she said, "You do." I don't know. I was thinking maybe she's not real, or maybe she's not human. Maybe again, you can see, if it's funny, if you poke through these things, you can see all these seeds that I was hoping would sprout into something great, or at least serviceable. The seeds never did. Maybe this is one I will go back as sort of a bonus and redo it, like not as a new video, but maybe in the anthology, just sort of like as bonus material to see if I could come up with something more interesting. There's a couple artworks or stories like that. However, I don't feel like any of them have been as just pointless and going nowhere as this one. And so if you found yourself wondering what the fuck, or that was his terrible story, that's okay. I agree with you. Heartily agree with you. Futilely, I am going back up into the document looking for something. Please tell me something. I'm also trying to cut words to get down back to 1,000, but also maybe I'm hoping like, there will be a story. I will find the story. Yet no story is found. Ah, well, sometimes that's just how it goes. And you pick up, you dust yourself off, and you move on. There is my inspirational bit for the end of this. So do it. Welcome to the end, dear viewer. I am so glad you made it. This is where I talk about my final thoughts, what I liked, what I didn't like, maybe what I learned, and there is so much to not like. So let's start with all of that. And I think I talked a lot about this in detail in the writing, but I'm just going to repeat myself here, as I tend to do every week. The story never really goes anywhere. I think it's an interesting scene, perhaps. At least the artwork is very interesting. Maybe I could use it in another place somewhere. Maybe I could retool it somehow. Maybe the ambiguity in itself was interesting enough. I don't quite know. It's hard to say because I'm looking at this whole thing while I write it. It's difficult to know how compelling the words are until I inevitably go back and and do some editing and stuff. So maybe if I would have had more colorful language, more interesting prose, maybe that would have helped carry it. But alas, I don't think it did. And another thing I mentioned in the writing too is I really tried to steer clear of the noir aspect of it, despite it being very, very noir, the image. And of course, I couldn't help myself when I went there. So I really need to step back from that because I not only do I enjoy writing differently in different genres and different styles, but when I stick with one for too long, and I've done that with fantasy a couple times, I did some back-to-back fantasies, I start to feel like I repeat myself, even though I probably do regardless. But anyway, next week will be something very different. So what did I like? Is there anything to like in this story? I don't know. It's hard to say. I mean, I guess the line by line stuff is okay. I mean, I don't hate it. I didn't find that to be a sticking point. It was more the story that was the sticking point. Whereas I know sometimes when you write, it's difficult finding the right phrasing or the right wording. Not to say that this is great by any stretch, but at least that wasn't too difficult. So at least there was that. Thankfully, there was something. And I know it's just a tragedy because I love the image so much. And this one's been a bookmark for mine for a long time. And I just forgot about it. And I've been going through all my bookmarks and said, wow, I should finally do this one. I should do this one. And so I did. And I apologize. So what is the moral of the story? I guess the moral of the story is sometimes you don't find the story, and that's okay. You move on. Thankfully, this isn't a novel. This wasn't a big project where I had spent so much time trying to figure it out and just it never came out. Of course, I wasted a couple hours of my life. Wasted's probably a bad word. I did learn some stuff that I will take away, and hopefully it won't be a resistance for me for my next story. I'll keep this one short just because I don't think there's much else to talk about. I know. I'm kind of bummed about this one, but it's okay. Here it is in all of its ugly glory. But still, if you would like to support the channel, give me a like. If you liked any aspect of this video, subscribe for story-related content. I have a new book out. It's called A Song for the End of the World. This story does go somewhere, so pick it up if you're interested. It's a post-apocalyptic story of bleak proportions. So if that's your thing, you may like it. And thanks again for watching. So keep reading, keep writing, and I will see you next week. Thanks. Bye. If you'd like to read the story in its non-video format, check the link in the description. I didn't edit anything else, promise. Thanks again.